The Reinheitsgebot, everybody talks about it. And in my archive, I have an original. It was printed as a law book.
Which is
that's original from 15, and actually printed in 1520 because the law was made in 1516. And then it took a while until they were formally printed into the law book.
Beer world is full of myths, legends, and frankly dodgy histories. But few of these stories hold the sway and fascination of Germany's Reinheitsgebot, or purity law. Signed way back in 1516, it's still in effect today, meaning no German brewery can call their beverage beer if it's made with anything other than barley, hops, and water, with an exception apparently made for Hefeweizen. In Germany, beers brewed to the Reinheitsgebot are held in higher esteem than those not, and the effect has spread to the rest of the world too, with many international breweries boasting about brewing to its simple requirements. Obviously, craft brewers have little regard for it, but its influence both in beer history and the modern day is still huge. So what's the story of this remarkably Puritan and ancient law? We got on a plane to Bavaria, where the law was passed, to find out. We'd heard from another beer writer that the Prince of Bavaria, Prince Leopold, had an original copy, and that it was his direct ancestors that wrote and signed it. So after more than a little research in Munich itself, we jumped on a train to Geltendorf, about an hour west, to visit the prince in his castle.
So we are on the train to Geltendorf, which is a small village about 25 miles outside of Munich. We're going to Schloss Kaltenberg. Schloss is German for castle, to meet the Prince of Bavaria and talk about the Reinheitsgebot. Talk about his family he was the guy that got married and created Oktoberfest. So this is exciting, but neither of us have any idea what to expect.
Well, it's quite an old history. Our family has been the longest ruling family in Europe. We ruled the country of Bavaria from 1180 all through until the German Revolution in 1918. So that was 738 years of continuous ruling. And beside that, obviously, in a country, food and drink were of relevance. So as a ruler, you always had to look at what do your people need and what are important things for the day-to-day politics. Now, when it comes to beer, beer was in the very early days not the key element. We had the first brewery in the family in 1260, which is quite a long time ago. And since that time, we had about 70 different breweries over the decades or the centuries. But beer always has been important because it was important day-to-day food. Why? Very simply because in the old days, if you drink water, you would probably die very quick from some bacteria in the water. And beer being cooked was always safe, as was wine. So either you had wine and you poured wine into your water to sterilize, or you had beer. They didn't know why it worked. But if you drank a slightly alcoholic beverage, it was safer. And you must imagine in 1500, food was always a big problem. Some years you had a good harvest and it was fine. Next year you had a bad harvest. The prices soared. And so we had to make a law which is now known as the purity law, and which basically did a few important things. It protected the wheat from being used for production of beer.
So it stipulated only barley?
It was stipulating you may make beer out of barley, hops, and water, and nothing else. Now that did, on one side, it protected wheat from brewing, and therefore helped to secure the food. Second thing it stopped people from being poisoned, because in order to make cheaper beer, people were using poisonous plants, poisonous mushrooms, to make the drink feel that you get intoxicated, but it wasn't by the strength of the beer, it was by poisonous plants.
Right.
And so many people killed by that. Therefore, reducing the only spice, hops, which was a very known medical plant. And the medical plant, and it makes you sleep, it's a little bit tranquilizing, and it is antiseptic. So using hops into beer helped to make the beer last. Plus, it had the side effect that it made you feel comfortable and a little bit tired, which was counterbalancing the alcohol. Last but not least, it guaranteed that if you ordered a beer, if you bought a beer, the beer price was fixed, was a national price, and people knew what they were getting for the money. And that really defined the product beer. And we believe very strongly that without the purity law, beer would have never had such an impact, because people really were relying on the quality. And the Reinheitsgebot, everybody talks about it. And in my archive, I have an original. It was printed as a law book.
Which is
that's original from and actually printed in 1520, because the law was made in 1516. And then it took a while until they were formally printed into the law book. And the law was passed at as a parliament sort of meeting. And then they went out to the printers, because every court in the country had to have the law book. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the original law books, which was made printed in 1520, and it's quite interesting because it shows the two characters who are Maximilian, and that was Wilhelm IV from Bavaria, and his brother Ludwig X of Landshut, and those two merged their countries, and because of this merger, they had to reprint and redo and unify all the laws. So in that law book, in that law book, they fixed the beer law, how to make beer, and the purity law in there is not a big document like many people might imagine. It's just a paragraph in the law book on how to make beer, and it says how beer is made in summer and winter, and then in here it says to make beer you may only use barley, hops, and water. Yeast was not mentioned, very simply because yeast was at that time not understood as a biological process. They thought the yeast was part of the malt. And so it was not mentioned. But it's very simple. But it's amazing that a simple law like that can last for 500 years. And it basically documented what beer is. It defined the product.
So this purity law, when it came in, must have been hugely important, because people were, it was the main thing they consumed in the day. Yes,
absolutely. It was guaranteeing what they were getting. And I think today it's still relevant, because I think the most important is that people know what they're getting for their money. And if in Bavaria, if you buy a beer, you get a pure product, a pure natural product with no chemistry, and it is 100% malt, it is hops, and it is water. And it is not with potatoes or with sugar or with corn or with all kinds of other things, and it's not with flavors. It has no chocolate in it or no fruits in it or whatever. And I think that's important. And making something else is perfectly possible. If you have a creative brewer, nobody stops him to do a creative brew, and he can call it brew of whatever. Raspberry brew or sugar brew or whatever. But he shouldn't take the name of a very reputed product and put a completely crazy product under a category which gives people security of what they're getting. I think that's unfair. And that I don't criticize microbrewers. I think it's fantastic we have them and that they have innovations and whatever. But they should say that they're innovative, but they're not doing beer. They're creating new brews. What's wrong with that? Nothing. But what they try to do is try to hijack a reputation for a product which doesn't fit for the reputation. That's my personal opinion. I know I'm very critical. I'm very controversial on that. But I think if you talk to consumers, I think they will agree to that in general.
In some ways, we agree with the Prince. When it comes to brewing Pilsner and Helles, if there's corn, rice, oats or other adjuncts in there, we think it's right it's flagged. We're not sure we agree with the Prince on stopping the use of the term beer in these cases though. Beer's had delicious and safe ingredients outside of the Reinheitsgebot for thousands of years before the law and has had them for hundreds of years since. Simply flagging those brewed according to the law is enough, in our opinion. In any case, his own family quite quickly got into the business of brewing beer that contravened the Reinheitsgebot, as we learn next.
About 100 years later, in 1600, we had an interesting situation because we had breweries in all that time, but at that time there was a young ruler in Bavaria. He got to power at the age of 17, Duke Maximilian, later Duke Elector Maximilian. And when he got to power, his father had run the state into almost bankruptcy. So they went as far as to ban using trumpets for the dinner because it was too expensive. And there was no money. So the father withdrew and passed on to his young son. And the young son was a genius economically. And he looked, how can you produce income in a country which had no raw materials? We had no metal. All we had was good craftsmen, but it was a poor country. So he saw that there was one brewery on the Danube, which was held by an old family, and it had the last remaining old right to use wheat. Wheat was, Reinheitsgebot didn't allow it, but there was some breweries left originally, and there was one left which had the right to brew Weissbier.
So how did they have that right?
From very old times. Right. And the older rights were never cancelled. They were able to maintain that old right. And so he bought that brewery because the owner died, bought the brewery, and then he tested whether he could make this beer in Munich. Test went well. So he built a brewery in Munich and started producing Weissbier. And then in summer, it was forbidden to brew normal lager beers. The brewing season was from St. Michael's in September till St. George in April 23. And in summer, you had to keep the beer in cold cellars, but you couldn't brew because it was too warm, the fermentation didn't go well, so it was banned. Weissbier is brewed with high temperatures. Mm-hmm. So having a beer he could produce in summer, he had basically a monopoly of production in summer. And then he also did a couple of supporting laws that elder pubs had to carry his Weissbier. So during his rule, he built something like 25 breweries, and the breweries were built, some of them were built by the most famous architects of that time, of Baroque architecture, fantastic breweries, and there's still a few of them left. And there, where you can see how they were done. And the Weissbier became his biggest income. It paid up to something like almost 50% of the total cost of running the state. But he kept that very quiet and it didn't go through the state administration, it went through a special administration, which he kept the income of that in a castle in Burghausen, a big fortress, kept all the income there, and from there he was financing.
Just diving into piles of money in his castle.
And financing his country with it. It was quite amazing.
So within one generation, he sort of turned the
bankruptcy
tide
into a solid financed country, and it was unbelievable. And within 30 years, he did economic calculations, and said, okay, how many people live in that area? Is it worthwhile to put a brewery there? And how many years for full financing of it. And he did not allow more than 4 years to pay back the complete investment.
Wow. So he had a very modern approach
Complete modern
to business.
approach. He is known as one of the leading early persons in mercantilism in Europe.
So it was like Bavaria was pretty much saved by beer, which is quite
Yes.
quite a nice.
Well,
think about, yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah.
When they were just celebrating in Munich a few days ago, in 1800 and something, I think in I don't know the exact year, the opera house of Munich burned down in winter, and they had no water, so they got the beer from the local Hofbrauhaus to distinguish the fire.
Did it work?
Yes.
Wow.
The opera was burned down
Was
anyway.
everybody upset because they didn't have any beer? And
Yes,
is the
after-
opera
They were
very
hoses, like one for me, one for the fire.
The mean thing is, once it was the fire was distinguished and the opera house was destroyed,
Yeah.
they actually increased the tax on beer to rebuild. That was a bit unfair. Yes.
The influence of the Wittelsbach family on beer in the region and around the world is incalculable. Alongside the invention of pale lager at Pilsner Urquell in 1842, the Reinheitsgebot essentially created the lager culture that sprung up in the 1800s and went on to dominate the world. And at a similar time in history, the Wittelsbachs made another great contribution to the brewing and beer world.
Another interesting thing, but that's not brewing beer, that is just on the beer history. The largest beer festival in the world was originally the wedding party of my great-great-grandfather, the one who's up there in the picture, on the middle on the left.
Yeah. But so your brewery, you don't pour at Oktoberfest.
No,
how's that
because
sort
we
of
are
come about?
outside. We're not within the city of Munich. Originally, the city, when the Oktoberfest was created, it was a national festival. It was a national festival with horse races, with entertainment, everything, and there was no restriction on Munich beers. The restriction on Munich beers came after the revolution in Germany, and a bit later in the early 20s after the Big Depression. And the Big Depression, and Munich was broke, and they didn't have the money to start Oktoberfest after World War I. And so the Munich brewers were afraid of losing their promotion tool and financed Oktoberfest for 2 years. And so after that, the city of Munich was sort of loyal to them and didn't allow anyone else in. Now, I think that was in principle a good idea. And the problem is that those breweries, with exception of 2, are no longer really existing. And because originally you had Löwenbräu, you had Franziskanerbräu, you had Spatenbräu, you had many breweries. Those 3 have merged to InBev. And on the other side, you had Thomasbräu, you had Salvatorbräu, you had Paulanerbräu, you had Pschorrbräu, you had Hackerbräu. That's all merged into a joint venture of Heineken and the Schörkhofer Building Company. And so I think today the city of Munich should rethink their rules, because I don't think it's a great idea if they are supporting the 2 largest brewing companies in the world and exclude regional brewers from around the region and exclude small breweries in Munich as well. But I think that's something that, that's something the city has to deal with. We are very happy out here. We do our own events. We do big events in Kaltenberg.
Jousting
We have,
tournament
yeah,
every
the
year?
jousting tournament turned out to be the world's largest medieval event, and that's very attractive. We do other events. We do a big Christmas market where we had this year, I think, about 120,000 people. And we do other things. We do open air pop concerts. We do quite a number of activities here. So we're quite happy what we control ourselves. And still, selling beer on Oktoberfest would be okay, but it's not a must.
Despite not being part of Oktoberfest or indeed ruling Bavaria anymore, the brewing traditions of the Wittelsbachs lives on under Prince Leopold at Kaltenberg Castle. Here and at 2 other locations, he brews fantastic lagers and weiss beers under a few different brands. Our favourites being his specialty brewery König Ludwig, which he uses to keep one particular disappearing style alive.
Yes, we do. Here in Kaltenberg, Schlossbrauerei Kaltenberg, And we have many brands. We have the brand of this house, which is Kaltenberg, which we've been producing in England for a long time. And we are now producing in many other countries. And then we have specialities, König Ludwig Weißbier, König Ludwig Dunkel. König Ludwig Dunkel is a brand leader for dark lagers.
Right.
And when I started running the brewery here, people in Bavaria had basically forgotten about dark beer. Till the 50s, it was the dominating product. By 1970, it was gone. And so we still had a little bit of dark beer, and so we said, okay, if everybody else is promoting normal lager, we promote dark lager. Go the opposite direction.
After our talk and tour of the brewery, we were treated to a tasting of, well, I think just about all of the Prince's beers. Each one presented in incredible miniature versions of their official glassware. Some of the beers were absolutely world class, especially the Zwickel and the Weissbier. There was even a 6-year-old bottle of strong dark bock beer he'd brewed and barrel aged for 8 years to celebrate 500 years of the Reinheitsgebot in 2016. The beautiful beer and location got me thinking about the weight of history that must sit on the Prince's shoulders, and how well he's serving that legacy by being so educated and open about his family's history, and by continuing to brew truly exceptional beer. To the Reinheitsgebot, of course.
Your ancestors would be incredibly proud to see brewing still very much at the heart of the family, even
Well,
though
it's nice
everything else has changed.
It's something which is very close with the people. And you have, in every village you have smaller beer festivals, you have local shooting clubs, you have local traditional clubs, you have music clubs. And so whenever they have a celebration, beer is sort of in the middle. And I think if you have a really good beer salesman, he should be in the local hierarchy just after the head of the city or the head of the district.
Mayor, beer sales guy. Right?
Beer sales guy.
Sounds good to me.
That's important. If you can achieve, and in reality, if you look how the people are greeted at a normal beer festival, they would obviously greet the local mayor, but they always will also greet the representative of the brewery pretty much at eye level. Why? Because that's the guy who is in charge of the fun. He's organizing the beer tent, he's organizing the party, he's doing... So for the local clubs, the beer is really the engine which keeps the social activities going. And I think that's quite important. And so the relevance of beer, even if it's sometimes sold way under value, is very strong. Another interesting example, if you look at what beer means, try to get someone to shovel the snow in front of your house. You give him €50, nobody will do it. Give him a crate of beer, he'll happily do it.
He'll drink while he's doing it.
The perceived value of a crate of beer is probably about 3 to 4 times what the money value is. It's amazing. And so if you say, okay, do this for me, you get a beer, they'll do things which you would not do for a lot of money. But it shows how a product is appreciated by the people.
And I guess it's the socialising around that beer as well. So it's not just the promise of an alcoholic beverage. It's the promise of we'll have a beer together.
It's exactly that. It's a social communication. It's the acceptance of someone. Yeah.
Part of the community.
Of a community, yes.
So that was the only brewery in the residence of a member of a royal family.
In the world.
In the world, we think.
We think. They think.
Yeah.
Quite amazing, really, right?
The places this channel takes us. And when, it wasn't on camera, unfortunately, but the moment where he just brought out this little grey book and was like, yeah, this is an original.
The original.
16th century copy of the Reinheitsgebot was a pretty exceptional moment.
We thought it was going to be in a glass cabinet.
Yeah, well, and I thought potentially it was like that big poster that you see when you go on Google search, but it's a book. I knew it was a larger book of rules, and I never quite worked it out in my head. But yeah, to look at that and to see what a small part of that book it was, but equally the incredible impact it's had. Like he said, 500 years and the law hasn't changed.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't think it should. Millions of other people would disagree, but I did understand his point that, you know, I don't know whether it should be like you can't call it beer, but he is trying to say, you know, this is the way that beer was made and the way that pure beer is made, and it would be confusing.
If you know, it's packaged as beer to the German purity laws. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think from what he's saying about being honest and kind of you know, transparent, you know, like that goes back to such good intentions 500 years ago, when they didn't want people dying from putting all kinds of crazy stuff in beer. So, you know, this was, you couldn't drink water. This was the water of life, wasn't it, really, the beer?
What I really took away from that is just how integral beer is to Bavaria.
Yeah.
And how protectionist they are about it, you know? Like, it's not just, as I assume in Germany, that, you know, the local beers are so good they didn't get into craft. It's also this style of beer. This is the Zwickel, basically, from them. The unfiltered, straight from the tank style kind of beer. This stuff is their culture. You know, there's food, there's religion, there's all kinds of other things, but beer is the glue. It's a cliche to talk about beer being a social glue, but it really was what brought Bavaria together, held it together, what put out fires at its opera house.
Yeah, it funded, you know, kind of the 30-year war we learnt about.
Yeah. Well, funded the whole of Bavaria, not just the war.
The whole of Bavaria, and you know, it rebuilt this place as a sort of powerhouse of European culture and beer culture. You know, it's all fundamentally to do with the Reinheitsgebot, sticking to those rules. You know, I guess back then, those things meant more because it was life and death, right? You know, you knew what you were getting, you could trust it.
Yeah.
What's more important than feeding your child a beer that you can trust?
You know is safe. So yeah, like I admit, in writing and on the channel, I've used Reinheitsgebot as like a quirky bit of history, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
And having it from a descendant of the person that signed it, you know, has really changed my perspective on it. And we've also discovered a really beautiful brewery with an incredible outside space that we need to visit when the jousting's on.
I'm going jousting.
Wait, no, you're going to compete?
Oh no, that's too dangerous. I'm just going to go watch it.
I think you should compete.
Okay.
I'm only coming if you're competing.
Deal.
Of course.
One comes around one today. They don't see things the same. Two walk like two out the door. Then you have magic. One comes around one today. They don't see things the same. Two walk like two out the door. Then you have magic.